Well, to our top story this morning, overnight the United States launched fresh strikes against a Houthi radar site in Yemen, following a joint operation between the UK and the US, which was yesterday, of course.
Well, nearly 30 Houthi positions were targeted during the first wave of strikes.
In a statement, the Houthis' Supreme Political Council has vowed to retaliate, threatening that all American British interests have become legitimate targets for the Yemeni armed forces.
Well, in Yemen's capital of Sana'a, tens of thousands have joined a military parade and protest in support of Gaza.
Earlier yesterday, the UK's permanent representative to the UN, that's Barbara Woodward, defended strikes as legal under international law.
The attacks by Houthis on vessels in the Red Sea must stop. We have made this clear to the Houthis, and we call on them to de-escalate. The United Kingdom is committed to continue working with the international community and this Council to combat this international threat. We have published a summary of our legal position on last night's strikes and have reported to the Council in writing in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter.
Well, let's talk to Robert Fox, defence editor at the Evening Standard. Morning to you, Robert.
Morning.
First and foremost, bring us up to date with what has been happening last night or overnight.
This was a follow-up. It should be just seen as part of what happened yesterday. It was by Tomahawk missiles from an American cruiser, quite low level, quite focused, quite concentrated on radar stations and facilities. The White House has announced that the radar network is vital to the way the Houthis launch their drones and missiles, which is really the big problem, big threat to the warships as well as the merchant ships. And they're tidying that. They expect further reaction from the Houthis, which we've heard with those pictures very well portrayed from the capital, Sana'a. The Houthis are fighting a propaganda war now, and it must be said, just from my perspective, an extremely successful one. That I was just watching a rival station, the BBC, but it was full of, oh gosh, this has escalated things, this has really made things very difficult. Of course, they are very difficult in Gaza. And it was amazing to me to read across the world headlines how strong the Houthi narrative is. And yet, a real expert, Dr. Bork at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, said, actually, the Houthis are fighting a power struggle at home. So a lot of it is about that.
Can you explain then to us who they are? Where did they come from? Because they're not the official government of Yemen.
Could you go into a darkened room, put a towel over your head and would do this thing? They're in the middle of a civil war. They seized power and they controlled most but not all of Yemen in 2015. As the name says, it comes from the Houthi clan, who come from the northwest of the country. That's the bit of the Red Sea that goes way up towards the Suez Canal and, of course, Saudi Arabia above it. They are a very large clan, ethnicity. They fit very poorly, just to confuse you even further, between the Sunni, Shia, split in Orthodox Islam, because they're a bit of Shia. But to say that they have the same sympathy and outlook, theologically speaking, and this is theological politics, as Tehran, is not true. And they are a thing on their own. They are warlike, but they've been fighting now for a long, long time, since 2014. But they really came to prominence and started showing their muscle in the 1990s.
But they do seem to have a lot of muscle. This is the problem. And now, I mean, how concerned should we be that they've now said all American British interests are a target?
Stephen, of course we have to take that seriously. And as you say, sorry, that's why I didn't want to go into the footnotes too much. They have got good kit. They have got good stuff, either made by themselves under supervision from Iranian technicians, but there's a new generation of Iranian drones and missiles up to 1,000-mile range, potentially, so you can go right up the Gulf, coming in from Iran. And we're beginning to see them on the battlefield in the Red Sea, in the battle space there, and in Ukraine. And that's why we should be worried. And I think that's why the Americans and the British decided to strike yesterday. They'd been thinking about contingencies. It was getting very worrying at 28 incidents, big ships, and then this week we saw the attacks on the British and the American warship. Of course serious, of course warlike, but how long they are going to sustain this oceanic, this maritime war in a vital area against international shipping. Sorry, I was just going to add that the British Maritime Authority today has reported a missile was fired in the direction of another oil carrier just southeast of Aden, which is not fully in Houthi hands. Very complicated that the other party, backed by Saudi Arabia, has been very, very strong there. Just to confuse you further, the ship they were aiming at was Panama flagged, carrying Russian oil.
Oh, my goodness.
So what is going on? It missed by 500 metres, 500, 600 yards. But it just shows you how bizarre, how very odd. But instead of going off into blather about this, this is a vital sea lane area. Because, yes, it's very important for oil exports coming from the Gulf, parallel to the Red Sea, going to China, who must be very worried. But nearly a third of liquid natural gas coming down from the Gulf, largely from Qatar. It is a choke point, and it is vital, and it cannot be wished away.
Very briefly, Robert, is there anything to be read into the fact that last night's strike, or overnight strike, was American and not British?
It was I hate to say it, but the only thing that pops up in my mind, it was a tidying up on the previous operation. It was a missile, a Tomahawk, which the British don't have deployed at the moment, not as far as we know. We might have submarines in the area. And it wasn't a very big one, and we said we've just got to do it. And aircraft were not involved. Once aircraft get involved, I think the British get involved indeed. And by the way, there must be a lot of consideration going on in the Ministry of Defence now. What happens if this really does go on, not for days, but for weeks and months? So how are we going to reinforce? We've got a lot of forces proportionally in the area between the Red Sea and the Gulf and Cyprus, of course.
OK, Robert, for now, thanks very much indeed. See you later on.
Well, also joining us now is US political analyst Eric Ham. Very good morning to you, Eric. So the US was involved again last night. What's the buzz back at home? What are people thinking of all this?
Well, right now, there's really not much that we're hearing, at least on the ground, from the American electorate in terms of what's happening. In fact, where we are seeing perhaps the loudest voices regarding this latest attack on Houthi rebels in Yemen is actually from President Biden's own party. Some far-left Democrats are unhappy with the recent attacks executed by the United States on the Houthi rebels. And in fact, now what we are seeing is that there are some Democrats who actually believe that President Biden was out of step with this move, and that this was a bridge too far. And I think what we're seeing now is the tension coming from the president's own party over these latest.
OK, apologies.
We seem to have lost sound
bad connection with Eric there. Interesting, though, isn't it, that Eric's saying, you know, that in some respects, it's not really resonated with the American people in perhaps quite the same way. I wonder if that's partly because
it's so far away.
Well, it's so far away, but also is America as reliant on those shipping lanes as we are? Which may be an issue. I mean, I just don't know. They do produce more of their own goods, of course.
Yes, they do.
So that's...
There's no doubt it's Europe particularly which is reliant. But then the Americans have a huge stake in that area simply by the fact they've got, I think, 2 aircraft carriers and dozens of other ships and armaments there.
What I'd be interested to know, and we'll talk to Robert about it, it's coming back a little bit later on, is with the strikes that we have seen, I think it was 60 targets the first night, another additional 30 last night, and this tidying up, as Robert put it. How much will that have degraded what the Houthis can do? And how quickly will Iran sort it out again?
I don't even know if that's possible. You know, we've heard this time and again, haven't we, of blowing up their and targeting their where they have all their armaments and everything. But not just in this case, but in other wars, and it never seems to quite work as promised.
No.
Although you never know. I mean, obviously, we never know the exact amounts.
No.
But it's a frightening time. I must say, yesterday, did you find it? Everybody's talking about it.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's sort of slightly convincing themselves that this is the beginning of a much bigger war.
Well, yes, and is that the case or not? I mean, let's hope not. Let's hope not. Let's hope it is seen as a sort of separate issue, in a sense, because of the attacks on shipping and the warships.
But we're going to talk about this later. It's already having an effect on world oil prices.
Up 4%.
Yeah. If indeed, as what we're hearing, is that some oil tankers are diverting, the only diversion is round the Cape of Good Hope, all the way around Africa.
Which will cost
which
a
is
fortune.
another 1,700 miles or something.
So, with
17,000 miles.
Yeah, but with that in mind, is this just a blip, a reaction, rather than anything which is going to be long-term? You've got to hope so. But anyway, we'll keep you fully up to date with what is going on in all of that. What causes concern for a lot of people, of course, is that it is linked in a way to what is going on in Israel and Gaza.
Well, the Houthis are deliberately linking it, aren't they?
Well, they are.
They're using almost as an excuse the fact that they are targeting ships going through the Suez Canal, and they're saying it's their ships that are delivering to Israel.
Which isn't the case, though.
This
is the thing. No. It's not the case. But they are tying it up, and the Houthi rebels do support Hamas, and they're backed by Iran, which is also, of course, backing Hezbollah, which is so that's where it gets complicated.